Okay, so these new footsteps that were found are around 21,000 years old in North America. And prior to that, it was thought that the first people out in the U.S. were around 15,000 years ago with the current evidence that we have. So that's the short answer to the question at the top of this episode. And if you want to find out about how they did the science to figure out the answer to that question, you can stick around. It'll be in the timestamps below. It's cool the science that they used to find that out, and even more than that, if you want to stick around a little bit more, we've got some great little things on the show today. We will we will we will we'll be talking about that later. We'll be talking about the footsteps. We'll also be talking about a new solution for dealing with mine waste. And then after that, we'll be talking about how bumblebees are defending themselves against an invasive wasp. And we'll wrap up the show with the eternal question: should you leave your leaves? It's the fall season. Should you leave your leaves where they are? Should you sweep them up? What should you do with them to be the best friend for your local environment? This is Eco Show. Welcome to Eco Show. I'm Henry. This is a show about ecology, the environment, and things in that space, where we talk about different news in that world in the past week, and yeah, and then some tangents every once in a while, as you do. But our first news piece for today. So is that all the housekeeping? If this is your first time here, welcome. I'll try to put the timestamps below, so if a tangent goes on for too long, you can skip around to it. And if you're returning, welcome back. Thanks for checking in. Hope you're having a great day. Hope you're having a good week. And our first little piece of news this week is that mine waste is being has got a new way to figure out how to deal with it from some Australian Canadian science team, and they found out how to turn that mine waste into soil. So after you do your big mining operation, there's something left over called tailings, and tailings are the thing that's left over after mining, and it's usually toxic with heavy metals, like Def Leopards and uh, and Iron Maiden. There's all this of that in the soil. But actually, so there's a lot of toxic chemicals left over in the soil, and plants and even microbes can barely live in that usually. So usually the way that these are dealt with is they are stored away, or they're just kind of left there in a lot of the cases. And the issue with this is that it's obviously expensive to store all of these mining tailings, and if that bursts or if it cracks open, that's a huge environmental disaster. And if you leave tailings out and about on their own, it takes thousands of years for nature to break those down and things like that. So this research team used a bit of laser imaging in order to get an idea of the really small scale physical conditions that were going on in these tailings, and used this information to rehabilitate soil. And so they were able to then introduce different particles into this mixture that were able to support microbial life that could then grow plants in that. So they're able to successfully grow maize, so corn, and sorghum, which is another sort of, I don't know if it's a grain technically, but it's a cash crop. and they were able to grow those in it successfully. And this is looking like it could be scaled up pretty well. So a good thing there, a good thing that can be done from mining tailings. So good that people are looking into that. Mining is another one of those things where it's like, people, one of those sayings is like, if it's not grown, it's mined. And I was thinking about that the other day. I was looking at a big truck that was rolling down the street, and it was like, okay, it's a big metal truck. It's got some big plastic wheels, and it's running on gas. So this is all from under the ground, and so we've got this very close relationship with the ground for all of the technology and resources that we're using. So the least that we can be doing is at least cleaning up after ourselves well. So good to see that there are some solutions coming about there. And to go from the ground to the air now, bumblebees are figuring out how to defend themselves. So we've got bumblebees, and then you've got honeybees. I was going to say bumblebees and humblebees. And honeybees are a little bit less hairy, and bumblebees are the big kind of hairy ones. And so the main thing, I didn't really know too much of the difference about them, but bumblebees they'll have a little hive situation in like an abandoned, either in the ground or in some place, and they'll have a little bit of that sort of, I don't know if it's actually wax, but they'll have that same sort of a small honeycomb thing situation. But the big difference is that they hibernate. They tend to hibernate over winter, so they don't produce all of that honey that bees will produce, because they need food over the winter time. So bumblebees, bigger, hairier, kind of generally less aggressive. They still have a pointy bit, but they're not as aggressive as bees. Just generally kind of a chill vibe. You see a bumblebee going by and you just feel good. Bees are great. You love bees too, but when a bee's flying by, you're a little bit like, wait, let me not freak you out. But a bumblebee, it just makes you feel good. I feel like it improves your day every time you see a bumblebee. Anywho, so they're defending themselves. Where are they defending themselves against? They're defending themselves pretty well against yellow-legged hornets, which are this hornet that is an invasive hornet from Southeast Asia that has been traveling and been introduced around the world. It was originally accidentally introduced into France, apparently via a box of china, so like pottery and stuff, and it just spread like crazy. So this hornet is, luckily it's not aggressive, but if it's disturbed, it will sting you, and they're big, gnarly guys, and they have killed a few people via anaphylactic shock because they've got a nasty sting. And what they do around honeybees, and what there's been a little bit more looking at, is that they will hang around outside of a bee's nest, and they'll just hover there. I think it's called hawking like the bird, and it just hangs outside and then it kills it. So I didn't see if this is particularly just for competition reasons or if they eat them, but a hornet will hang out outside of a honeybee colony, and then it'll kill it, and another hornet will immediately fill its space, so they can really knock down a bee colony super quickly. And where these are introduced, the local bees just don't really have the adaptations for how to deal with this. Back in the original range of this hornet, the ways that bees have figured out how to defend themselves against it are that either they'll enter and leave their nest really quickly so as not to be caught by by these hornets, or they have another thing where I think it's called balling, where they will go and I think this is if the hornet gets into the nest, they'll go around it and they'll vibrate to create a really hot environment around the hornet and cook it, I believe. So, but that's all back in the original native range of the hornet. So, where it's been introduced, bees don't have defenses. Regular honeybees don't have defenses, but our friends, the bumblebees, have figured out a way to deal with this. And what they're doing is that they will just drop to the ground. So apparently, when a hornet catches them, they sort of just drop to the ground. They'll kind of try to battle it with the stinger a little bit, but they'll just kind of drop to the ground, and then the hornets can't really like keep a hold of them anywhere. So I couldn't find a video of that, but it sounded pretty cute. So that's a great, just another win for the bumblebee is just the easy way out. Just being like, I'm not even gonna fight. I'm just gonna drop to the ground. I'm a big old bumblebee. Don't mess with me. So bumblebees are figuring out their own ways to deal with hornets, but our regular old honeybee buddies have not so far figured out a solution to this. So there's a push to try to eradicate this hornet, but I believe it was just found in the U.S. and yeah, it's so tricky. You just need a little breeding pair or a queen to get somewheres, and once you get these any sort of bugs established, it's not a fun time. Okay. Back to our headline article about ancient fossils. So it has been thought in the literature generally. I know there are a lot of other things that I've watched that are like, humans were in North America 100,000 years ago, and so there's some interesting, people who have these speculations, but at least where the general scientific consensus has been at is that humans arrived in North America about 13,000 to 16,000 years ago. But there were these new footprints that were found in White Sands, New Mexico, and these footprints appear to be 21,000 years old. So this is pushes that marker back by a huge amount, and this was during the last time the glacial expansion peaked. So sometimes there's thought of like, oh, did people come over at one time or another? When glaciers were smaller or greater, but this was during the last time the glaciers were down at their lowest point. So the way that they found this originally, and this was a year or two ago, I believe, is they radiocarbon dated seeds from a nearby plant in the sediment layer that these footprints were found in. And these were from an aquatic plant. So the way radiocarbon dating generally works is that certain carbon molecules will degrade over time, and you can use that like a clock to see how old things are. This can have some issues, especially because this is an aquatic plant. So there are some questions about if the carbon that was brought into the plant could have been via nearby water or somehow could have tainted that. So I think it was pretty generally accepted, but there were still some questions about it. So there's been follow up that has looked at conifer pollens, so little pollen particles that make me sniffly, come from the pine tree and they go in the soil. And this is another way that you can look at time series data. So they could look at this and so these are produced by a terrestrial plant. So once that pollen has gone off of the plant, there's a lot less question about how old the radiocarbon is with that. And then a third, or it was combined with that, I don't quite remember, but there's a third type of dating that looks at when particular minerals were last exposed to sunlight. So as soon as that's covered up, it starts taking the clock down. So we've got a few different follow-up ways that were used to date these footprints, and yeah, so these all pointed to the same 20,000 years. So there's been a good amount of verification now. It would appear as though these were the footprints of a woman and a child who was occasionally carried on the back. So there's was thought to be a woman's footprints, and then there will be kids' footprints alongside it every once in a while. And so kind of a cute story, or it kind of brings that connection to it, these people that, it was someone walking with a little baby on their back, and then you get tired, so then the young kid is walking along beside them. So pretty cool that we get to walk alongside them in our minds, and these whole sorts of things. The reason that this can be so debated, or why people get so conservative about these sorts of things and will fight so hard to really make sure it's right, is that there will then be so many other ideas or projections about that time, about the relationships of humans and animals during that time. And there will have been so much research that's based off of the basic knowledge that it was 14,000 years ago. And now when it's 20,000, that then changes the way that we think about it. So it can seem like these folks are old and grumpy and don't want change, but change generally, if it's legit, will find a way to be enacted, and it looks like it is with that as well. So our last little piece today: should you leave your leaves? And the short answer is yes. So it's the fall in many parts of the world. Leaves are falling from the trees, and there are lots of good reasons for why you should just leave your leaves, or at the very least not put them in the rubbish bin. So leaves on their own, when they're left around, can be home for larvae, for lots of insects, for microbes, and for worms, and they're just generally good for soil health. They also compost into nutrients over the wintertime, which is great for the soil. And so some things that you can do if you don't want to just leave them all over your grass, you can move them around your trees or to garden beds, and it's just a great natural compost that you've got there. And some other benefits of that are that it reduces the amount of waste that then needs to be disposed of. So it's not going to a dump or some other place. Some cities now are starting to have compost programs, which I'm not sure how successful they're going, but it's still, if it saves you from having to buy some artificial fertilizer, that's generally a pretty good thing. And another benefit is that it can suppress weed growth. So you may have seen this sometimes. People will put out big black tarps over weeds to suppress the growth of weeds through. So this is sort of like a natural version of that, limiting the amount of sunlight that is going to weeds. So there's lots of knock-on benefits of doing this, and besides the fact of jumping in them. So that should be the priority. So like when we're talking about recycling, there's reuse, recycle, something else. And in the leaf hierarchy, the number one thing should be jumping in that pile of leaves as many times as possible. And only then, once you've exhausted the amount of jumping into pile of leaves ability that you've got, only then and only then should you make it into a compost situation. Okay? Gotta make that clear. You gotta jump in it as many times as possible. That's crucial for the health of the your own emotional, spiritual, and physical internal being. So there you go. There's some things about some reasons for why you should deal with your leaves. If it's really windy, though, if it's really windy where you're at, then maybe you can like crunch it down into the soil or something like that. So if that's a concern that you have, lots of creative things to do with it, but always prioritize jumping that pile of leaves. Okay, that's all we got on this show for this week, and I hope you're doing well. Thanks for checking in, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.